Citing a threat to national security, the president today signed legislation allowing law enforcement agencies to seize property from...
Under President George Bush's new zero-tolerance policy, marijuana is legal.
Using illegal drugs is against the law. And when you're caught, you will be punished. Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room. The rules have changed.
In a speech to the Coast Guard today, George Bush said that drug trafficking should be grounds for the death penalty.
I'm proposing $250 million, $2.2 billion, $8 billion, the largest increase in history.
Get real. Don't wait. Nobody wants the government legalizing it, fool. Think about the quality.
Hello and welcome to another edition of High Society. That clip you just saw, George Bush going ape shit on the world, was taken from Grass, and today's topic is forfeiture, asset forfeiture, otherwise known as, hey, the man just stole all our stuff. This has been prompted by a story in the Saturday, June 14th, 2003 Vancouver Sun. For the first time in BC, the federal crown has seized a home used by the owner as a marijuana growing operation, and Surrey Mounties are vowing to go after at least 9 other homes in the city. Now, apparently this was a 400 plant operation, not the biggest one I've heard of, but anyway. Shields said the forfeiture of the home marks a first in BC law enforcement and is only the second time in Canada a home has been seized as a proceed of crime related to a grow operation. The first seizure took place on April 30th in London, Ontario. The Surrey home is in fairly good shape for a former grow op because the grow itself is mostly confined to the unfinished basement, Shields said. The Surrey seizure could not have taken place without the cooperation of the Federal Crown and the Federal Department of Justice, Shields said. An additional 9 homes used for grow-ops in Surrey, including the one owned by Vu's sister, this is an Asian family here that they're dealing with, are now under restraint, the first stage of the forfeiture process. The homes range in value between $300,000 and $400,000. And then they go on and it says, unlike the U.S., Canadian police do not get a share of the revenue, nor do cities such as Surrey that fund their own police. Quote, we're not happy about that at all, said Surrey councillor Gary Timoshuk. That money should come back, in brackets, to the municipality that funds the police doing the work. The city of Surrey pays for 90% of its RCMP policing budget, while the federal government chips in the remaining 10%. Timoshuk said he would like the proceeds of crime revenue sharing to reflect the funding formula. On May 26th, Surrey passed a motion asking the federal government to return at least a portion of proceeds of crime revenue. That motion has been forwarded to the Union of BC Municipalities and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, but Timoshuk is not optimistic. Bill C-24, passed December 18, 2001, modified forfeiture law in Canada to allow the Crown to seize all property used in committing a crime. Under the old regulations, the government could only forfeit property if it was built or modified in order to carry out that crime. So, as you can see, This is all part of an expansion of the forfeiture laws. They get worse and worse every year. I'll demonstrate that at the end of the show. But first we're kind of going to go through the history of forfeiture and show you some kind of outrageous patterns of persecution of harmless people getting worse when you include more and more people in on the action. That's kind of the overlying theme I've noticed through looking through all this information. See if you agree. One more thing on the grow-op here. They tried to associate it with Vietnamese gangs and Hell's Angels. I guess that happens every time you have an Asian person in the news. There's automatically an assumption that they're part of an organized crime. They can't just be, ma and pa operations. And then here is the other quote on that. They noticed that the person who was stealing hydro, that's a no-no. You got to keep your karma good, grow outdoors and have small-scale operations that won't be noticed on their energy, or supply your own energy somehow. But they say that they had a switch that would shut off the hydro bypass if someone approached the electric meter, which, again, it was not good karma on the hydro. However, it was an ingeniously devised operation. I guess this was their highlight scapegoating image. People stealing hydro, big houses, lots of money. Obviously, they're organized criminals. So, like you to also note, this is a discussion on the internet discussion forums. Lawyer Brian McAllister pointed out that there are two bases on which real property may be forfeited. The first is if the property is offense-related property, which means, in the context of real property, is built or significantly modified for the purpose of facilitating the commission of a designated substance offense. This is a very high threshold and generally requires that the functionality of the house has been altered to accommodate the grow-up. You have probably been fewer of these cases than you have fingers on your hands. The other basis for forfeiture is if the property is the result of proceeds of crime. In this context, it doesn't necessarily relate to the grow-op itself, but how the property was acquired. This is the likely basis for the seizure of the houses of this story. This would arise in a situation where someone with no income lives inexplicably in a nice house with a mortgage. I guess I'm not saying that Brian McAllister is saying this, but I'm reading from this that you should have a good cover if you don't want your house seized. You should also have an explanation for why all that money is there and why you have a nice house and no job. Also note that even if police charged the owner of an alleged residential growing operation, they say it's not financially worth their trouble to pursue seizures and forfeiture proceedings unless the owner has had a substantial financial investment in the property. In other words, mortgage your house, and they probably won't seize it because it isn't worth their while. Now I'd like to go into the history of asset forfeiture a little bit, just hitting on some dates and some highlights, skimming over it quite quickly. All the details, again, in the information box. In 1500 BC, Moses tells the Israelites that God has decreed, quote, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. I guess this is seen by some as the genesis of asset forfeiture law, although I don't quite understand it myself. More interestingly, and has been pointed out by Chris Bennett, that there was a stipulation in Deuteronomy 13:18 which forbid retaining the scapegoat's property. So, whether they did that just to look good or whether they saw how out of control things could get if you gave people the proceeds of crime to say, the authorities, for whatever reason they didn't get into scapegoating. The Christians, however, really did. Around 325 AD or CE, Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, began to confiscate or destroy the property of the less dogmatic sects. As Jesus predicted the scribes would do. As early as Irenaeus, accusations concerning secret sacraments began being leveled at Gnostic branches who were having their property taken away. So in this instance, you can see that around 325, the first anti-cannabis property seizures were being taken place.